If there is one crisis that both the American left and right agree is real, it is of declining mobility. The American dream is at heart that someone, no matter his or her background, can make it in this country. A few weeks ago, 4 economists at Harvard and the University of California at Berkeley released a path-breaking study of mobility within the United States. And last week, the Journal of Economic Perspectives published a series of essays tackling the question from an international perspective. The research is careful and nuanced, yet it does point in one clear direction. The question is, will Washington follow it? For over a decade now, it has been documented that Northern European countries do much better at moving poor people up the ladder than the United States. Now, some have dismissed these findings, pointing out that the United States cannot be compared with Denmark, an ethnically homogeneous country of 5 million people. But Miles Korak points out in an essay published last week that Canada is a very useful point of comparison for the United States because it is much like America. The percentage of foreign-born Canadians, for example, is actually higher than Americans. And recent research finds that people in Canada and Australia have twice the economic mobility of Americans. What is intriguing is that many of the factors that seem to explain the variation across countries also explain the variation across the United States. The most important correlation in the Harvard-Berkeley study appears to be social capital. Cities with strong families, civic support groups, and a community service orientation do well on social and economic mobility. That's why Salt Lake City, dominated by Mormons, has extremely high mobility rankings. This would also explain why America in general fares badly. The U.S. has many more broken families, single parents, and dysfunctional domestic arrangements than Canada and Europe. The other notable feature in the Harvard-Berkeley study is the design of cities. Places that are segregated, where the poor live far from the middle class, do much worse than those that are more mixed. This probably has to do with geography. It's hard to physically get to jobs when they're far away. It might also mean that people in poor neighborhoods end up in a self-reinforcing cycle of underfunded schools, high crime, and social breakdown. In any event, these factors, while important, might be difficult to change in any reasonable period of time. Social capital cannot be rebuilt in, say, 5 years. Cities cannot be quickly redesigned to integrate them or to create greater density. That leaves the last large factor in explaining the decline of mobility in America, and that is public policy. And here, Professor Korak explains the United States is the great outlier. Simply put, America spends much less on the education and health of poor people, especially poor children, than any other rich country, and that retards their chances of escaping poverty. A recent OECD report points out that the United States is one of only 3 rich countries that spends less on disadvantaged students than others, largely because education funding for elementary and secondary schools in America is tied to local property taxes. So by definition, poor neighborhoods end up with badly funded schools. In general, America spends lots of money on education, but most of it is on college education, and most is directed towards those already advantaged in various ways. What's clear from all this research is that countries that invest more heavily in all their children's health care, nutrition, and education, well-being more generally, end up with a much stronger ladder of opportunity and access than America. Now, that is something we can change, and with relatively little money. So if we want to restore the American dream, we now have the beginnings of a path forward. For more on this, go to cnn.com/Fareed, where you will find a link to my Washington Post column.